My name is Alina, and for 20 years, the architecture of my life was built on a partnership I believed to be as solid as bedrock. My husband, Mark, was the celebrated face of Innovate Dynamics, the tech empire we had founded in the garage of our first tiny apartment. He was the visionary CEO, the charismatic frontman who charmed investors and graced the covers of business magazines. I was the silent genius in the background, the one who had actually built the engine that made the whole thing run. I was the software engineer who, in a flurry of sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee and a fervent passion, wrote the core algorithm for Nexus, our flagship product. That algorithm was a piece of my soul, an elegant, intricate tapestry of code that revolutionized data management. But when our first child was born, I made a choice. I stepped back. I traded boardrooms for playdates, coding marathons for bedtime stories. I did it willingly, believing we were a team, that my contribution was already baked into the company's DNA, and that his success was our success. I was the supportive wife, the steady hand at home that allowed him the freedom to conquer the world. I managed our lives, our finances, and our family, never imagining that the foundations of our shared life were being systematically hollowed out from beneath me. The betrayal, when it came, was not a single, clean break, but a catastrophic structural failure. It began with a chill in his voice, a distance in his eyes I had mistaken for the stress of running a billion-dollar company. Then I discovered the discrepancies in our finances, small at first, then gaping. He was siphoning money from our joint savings, our retirement funds, funneling millions into a secret account I couldn't access. The truth arrived with the brutal efficiency of a court summons. He was having an affair with his assistant, a woman barely out of college, and he was filing for divorce. We met in his vast, minimalist office overlooking the city, the one I had helped him design. He didn't look remorseful. He looked irritated, as if I were a loose end he was eager to tie up. He slid a folder across the polished expanse of his desk. It was a divorce settlement offer so insulting, so dismissive of our 2 decades together, it felt like a physical blow. "This is more than generous, Alina," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "It will allow you to live comfortably." I was speechless, staring at a figure that was less than a rounding error in his personal fortune. "Mark, the company," I stammered, my mind reeling. "Our company, I wrote the Nexus code. I have a stake in this." He leaned back in his leather chair, a faint, pitying smile on his lips. It was the smile that broke me. "You haven't worked at Innovate in 15 years, he said coolly. "You made your choice. The company is mine. My creation. You're a housewife, Alina. Let's not get confused." His words were meant to erase me, to reduce my life's work to a hobby I once had. He saw me as a relic, a piece of his past he was ready to discard. Devastated, adrift in the ruins of my life, I retreated to the silence of our cavernous, empty home. As I sorted through 2 decades of shared memories, boxing up a life I no longer recognized, I stumbled upon a box of old hard drives from my early coding days. And then I remembered. Years ago, while building the very first iteration of the Nexus algorithm, I had embedded a failsafe, a kind of digital ghost in the machine. It was a secure backdoor, a master key that gave me unique, untraceable access to the system's core architecture. I had created it as a last resort, a way to fix a catastrophic failure or a security breach from the outside. I never imagined the catastrophic failure would be my own husband. In that moment, staring at the dusty hard drive, the grief that had paralyzed me began to crystallize into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He called me a housewife. He was about to find out what happened when that housewife decided to go back to work. The first few weeks were a blur of grief and logistics. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara who specialized in contentious divorces and intellectual property. When I explained my history with Innovate Dynamics and showed her my original design documents for the Nexus algorithm, a predatory gleam entered her eyes. "He erased you from the corporate history," she said, flipping through the pages. "But he can't erase the code. Code is like DNA, Alina. Yours is all over the crime scene." While Clara began the legal war of attrition, I started my own silent, undeclared one. I converted the guest house, a space Mark had intended as a Zen meditation studio for his new life, into my command center. I bought new servers, top-of-the-line machines that hummed with latent power, and I went to work. Using the failsafe, which I dubbed the Prometheus key, I slipped into the backend of Innovate's servers. It was like walking tea. Rough a house I had built, only to find it had been gaudily redecorated by someone with no taste. Mark's team had added layers of clunky, inefficient code on top of my elegant original. They had prioritized flashy, marketable features over stability and security. The system was bloated, slow, and riddled with vulnerabilities that only I could see. I spent 2 weeks just observing, a ghost in their machine, downloading every client list, every internal memo, every bug report. I read Mark's confident emails to the board, promising them that his forthcoming Nexus 2 would be a game changer, doubling their market share. He was pouring a fortune into a massive launch party and a marketing blitz, all while the product itself was a gilded mess. He was so blinded by his own arrogance, so dismissive of my capabilities, that the thought of me as a threat would have been laughable to him. He was a king admiring his new clothes, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire kingdom was built on my land. With all the intelligence gathered, I began to code. I wasn't just fixing the old algorithm. I was building something entirely new from the ground up, using my original principles but leveraging 2 decades of technological advancement. I worked with a furious, obsessive energy I hadn't felt in years. The quiet, domestic part of my brain went dormant, and the engineer, the architect, the creator, roared back to life. I slept in 4-hour shifts, my dreams filled with cascading lines of code. The sun would rise and set outside my window, and I would barely notice. My children were with my sister, shielded from the ugliness of the divorce and their father's new life. I was alone, isolated in my digital forge, hammering out the weapon of my revenge. I decided to call my new software Phoenix. It was a fitting name. I was rising from the ashes of my old life, and my creation would be the fire that consumed his. Phoenix was everything Nexus 2 wasn't. It was sleek, incredibly fast, intuitive, and most importantly, secure. I designed it to be seamlessly compatible with Innovate's existing systems, making the switch for any client a simple, one-click process. As I compiled the final version, a profound sense of power settled over me. Mark had taken my past and tried to bury it. I was about to steal his future. The strategy had to be as elegant and ruthless as the code itself. A frontal assault would be costly and time-consuming. I needed to strike with surgical precision. My lawyer, Clara, had managed to delay the divorce proceedings, bogging Mark down in depositions and discovery motions, keeping his attention focused on the legal battle while I prepared for the corporate one. It was the perfect smokescreen. My intelligence gathering had given me Innovate's most valuable asset, their client list. I knew every customer, from the small businesses to the multinational corporations. I knew their contract renewal dates, their pain points with the current software, and the exorbitant fees they were paying for it. Mark saw them as cash cows. I saw them as my liberation army. I created a simple, professional website for my new one-woman company, Phoenix Systems. The landing page was a masterclass in minimalist design with a single, compelling offer. Phoenix, the future of data management. Powerful, secure, and for a limited time, completely free. The plan was audacious. I would offer the full, premium version of Phoenix to all new users for free for 6 months. There would be no contracts, no hidden fees. I was creating an offer so irresistible that it would be professional malpractice for any CTO to ignore it. I wasn't just competing with Mark, I was making him irrelevant. The timing had to be perfect. Mark had scheduled the launch of Nexus 2 for a Tuesday, accompanied by a lavish press conference at a downtown hotel. He had invited tech journalists, industry analysts, and his top-tier clients. He was expecting a coronation. I scheduled my own launch for the exact same day, at the exact same time. But my launch wouldn't have champagne or keynote speakers. It would be a single, targeted email, sent simultaneously to the primary contacts at every single one of his client companies. The email was my declaration of war. It was polite, professional, and devastating. It introduced Phoenix Systems and its superior product. It highlighted the security flaws inherent in the current Nexus platform, flaws I knew for a fact his team had been unable to fix in version 2. And it presented the 6-month free offer as a no-risk opportunity to experience the next generation of data management. I wrote the email myself, every word carefully chosen to sow doubt and inspire curiosity. The final piece of the puzzle was the messenger. I couldn't send it from a generic email address. It had to have weight. It had to have authority. The night before the launch, I legally changed my name. I was no longer Alina Vance, the forgotten wife. I was Alina Rostova, reverting to my maiden name. The name of a brilliant engineer, the one listed on the original patent filings for the Nexus algorithm, buried deep in the archives but legally irrevocably there. The email would be signed by me, Alina Rostova, founder of Phoenix Systems and original architect of the Nexus core. It was not just a marketing email, it was a reclamation. I was taking back my name, my work, and my legacy. The stage was set. While Mark was preparing his victory speech, I was cueing the digital guillotine. The morning of the launch, my guesthouse command center was quiet except for the low hum of the servers. I had a single laptop open, a news feed of the Nexus 2 launch event on one side of the screen, and my email deployment sequence on the other. I felt a strange, zen-like calm. There was no more anger, no more grief. There was only the cold, clear certainty of the task ahead. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, the live stream of Mark's press conference began. He strode onto the stage to thunderous applause, looking tanned, confident, and utterly oblivious. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive suit, his teeth whitened to an almost supernatural brilliance. He launched into his speech, full of buzzwords and empty promises about synergy and paradigm shifts. "For 20 years I have been on a journey," he began, and I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. His journey. While he spoke, I watched the first technical reviews of Nexus 2 start to trickle in on the tech blogs. The verdict was not kind. Buggy, unintuitive, a disappointing and overpriced update. Mark had rushed the product to market, and it was showing. At 10:15 a.m., as he was building to his grand crescendo, I clicked execute. A progress bar appeared on my screen. Within 60 seconds, my email had been delivered to thousands of inboxes across the globe. For a moment, nothing happened. Mark finished his speech, the press asked softball questions, and the event concluded. I watched him on the screen, smiling and shaking hands, the picture of success. I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I miscalculated? Had my plan been too subtle? Then my own inbox began to chime. The first was a reply from the CTO of a mid-sized logistics company. "Ms. Rostova, your email is very timely. We are highly dissatisfied with the new Nexus update. Your offer is compelling. We are initiating a trial of Phoenix today." Then another and another. They came in as a trickle, then a stream, then a flood. They were from his biggest clients, his most loyal customers. They were all saying the same thing: "We're in." My phone buzzed. It was Clara. "Check the stock price for Innovate," she said, her voice tight with excitement. I pulled up the stock ticker. It was holding steady. But then, around noon, it began to dip, just a little at first. A tech blog published an article with the headline, "Innovate Dynamics in Disarray. As CEO launches Buggy V20, a mysterious competitor emerges, led by his own estranged wife." The article included a copy of my email and a link to the Phoenix Systems website. That's when the dip became a slide, and the slide became a freefall. The market, like his clients, was abandoning him. By the end of the day, Innovate's stock had lost 30% of its value. Mark's triumphant launch day had become a bloodbath. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating my face. The Phoenix had taken flight, and the world was watching it burn Mark's empire to the ground. The implosion of Innovate Dynamics was faster and more brutal than even I had anticipated. The story was simply too good for the media to resist. The betrayed genius wife, the secret backdoor, the perfectly timed revenge. It was a corporate soap opera, and everyone was tuning in. My 6-month free offer was a masterstroke. It removed any barrier to entry. Companies could run Phoenix in parallel with their existing Nexus systems, compare the results, and see for themselves. Phoenix was faster, more stable, and my small, agile support team, 2 trusted former colleagues I had hired, was more responsive than Mark's bloated, bureaucratic department. We were outmaneuvering him at every turn. Key clients began to publicly announce their departure from Innovate. First, a major European bank. Then, a Fortune 500 retailer. Each announcement was another nail in the coffin, triggering a fresh wave of panicked selling of his stock. Investors who had once toasted Mark's genius were now suing him for misleading them about the health of the company and the state of Nexus 2. Mark, predictably, went on the offensive. His lawyers sent me a cease and desist letter, accusing me of intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and a host of other trumped-up charges. Clara laughed as she read it. "This is desperation, Alina," she said. "He's accusing you of stealing a recipe that you wrote. Let him sue." The discovery process will be his worst nightmare. He tried to fig. T back in the press, giving a disastrous interview where he called me a vindictive amateur, claiming Phoenix was an unstable and insecure knockoff. But his credibility was shot. The tech community had already tested and validated my product. He just looked like a bitter, foolish man, which of course he was. I remained silent. I gave no interviews. I let the product and the story speak for themselves. The less I said, the more powerful my actions became. The more he raged, the more pathetic he appeared. His personal life was also unraveling. The young assistant, who had presumably signed on to be the girlfriend of a celebrated tech mogul, was not prepared for the public humiliation and the sudden evaporation of his fortune. She left him within a month. The irony was exquisite. He had left his wife of 20 years for a younger model, only to be abandoned by her as soon as the money and status disappeared. I watched all of this from the quiet of my command center, a detached observer of the destruction I had wrought. There was a grim satisfaction in it, but it was not joyful. It was the somber, necessary work of demolition. I was clearing the ground, removing the rotten structure he had built on my foundations so that something new could grow. 2 months after my launch, Innovate Dynamics, unable to stop the client exodus and crushed by debt, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The king was dethroned. His empire was in ruins, and the divorce proceedings, which he had initiated to cast me aside with a pittance, were about to take a very interesting turn. The final divorce settlement hearing was held in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom that felt a world away from the drama and chaos of the past few months. Mark was there, looking like a ghost of his former self. He had lost weight, his expensive suit hung on his frame, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed weariness. He had aged a decade in a matter of weeks. He sat with his legal team, a group of grim-faced men in dark suits. I sat with Clara, feeling a calm that bordered on serenity. The power dynamic in the room had been completely inverted. When we had started this process, he was the billionaire CEO and I was the dependent spouse. Now, he was on the verge of personal bankruptcy, and I was the founder of the fastest-growing software company in the industry. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Atherton, had clearly read all the filings and followed the news. She looked at Mark with an expression of profound disapproval. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "your conduct during this marriage, particularly with regard to the couple's shared financial assets and the intellectual property of Innovate Dynamics, has been, to put it mildly, egregious." Clara presented our case with cool, methodical precision. She laid out the evidence of Mark's financial deception, the millions he had hidden away. Then, she presented the evidence of my creation of the original Nexus algorithm, my name on the patents, my early design notes, sworn affidavits from former colleagues who had witnessed my work. "Elena Rostova is not seeking alimony, Your Honor," Clara stated. "She is seeking what is rightfully hers, the intellectual property she created, which her husband appropriated and subsequently ran into the ground." Mark's lawyers offered a feeble rebuttal, but it was useless. The facts were undeniable. The judge listened patiently, then delivered her ruling. She awarded me 100% of the marital assets that were left, citing Mark's fraudulent conduct. And then came the masterstroke. "With regard to Innovate Dynamics," she declared, "the court finds that the company's core intellectual property was, and remains, the creation of Ms. Rostova. Given that the company is now bankrupt and its primary assets are its patents, the court hereby awards the entirety of Innovate Dynamics, including all its patents, trademarks, and remaining assets, to Ms. Rostova as part of this settlement." A gasp went through the courtroom. Mark's face went ashen. He had started this to throw me away and keep everything. He was now leaving with nothing but his personal debts and public humiliation. I, on the other hand, had just been handed the keys to the kingdom I had built, stripped of all its liabilities. The patents for Nexus, now worthless to him, were priceless to me. They gave Phoenix Systems an unassailable legal foundation, shielding me from any future challenges. After the hearing, as I was leaving the courthouse, Mark was standing by the doors alone. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Elena," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "how could you do this? We built that together." I stopped and looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time in months. I saw not a monster, but a weak, pathetic man, a man so consumed by his own ego that he had to believe his own lies. "You're right, Mark," I said, my voice even and calm. "We did build it together, and when you tried to burn it down, you forgot one thing." "What?" he asked. "I'm the one who knows how to rebuild it from the ashes." I walked away without another word, leaving him standing in the shadow of the courthouse, a relic of a life I had already moved on from. The acquisition of Innovate Dynamics was a formality. I had no interest in the name, the brand, or the bloated corporate structure Mark had built. My team, which had grown to a dozen of the best engineers and support staff in the business, absorbed the one thing that mattered: the patent portfolio. We folded it into Phoenix Systems, creating a legal fortress around my new company. The old Innovate headquarters, a monument to Mark's ego, was liquidated to pay off his creditors. I had no desire to set foot in that building again. We established our new headquarters in a modern, collaborative workspace downtown, a place filled with light, energy, and a palpable sense of excitement. It was the polar opposite of the cold, hierarchical environment Mark had cultivated. At Phoenix Systems, the best idea won, regardless of who it came from. We were a meritocracy, a team. I made a point of hiring many of the talented engineers and employees Mark had fired or marginalized over the years. Their loyalty and gratitude became a cornerstone of our company culture. They had seen his hubris and my quiet competence firsthand, and they were fiercely dedicated to our new mission. Phoenix Systems grew at an explosive rate. With the 6-month free trial period coming to an end, we braced for a potential drop-off in users. It never came. We had proven our product's superiority so decisively that our conversion rate to paid subscriptions was nearly 95%. We weren't just the better option, we were the only option. We had effectively cornered the market I had created 2 decades earlier. I stepped into the role of CEO, a position I had never wanted but now embraced. I found that the skills I had honed as a mother and a household manager, multitasking, empathy, long-term planning, crisis management, made me a far more effective leader than Mark had ever been. I listened to my team. I trusted their expertise. I fostered a culture of respect, not fear. I was not the face of the company in the same way Mark had been. I didn't seek out magazine covers or keynote speeches. I focused on the product and the people. My reputation was not built on charisma, but on competence. My name, Elena Rostova, became synonymous with innovation, integrity, and a quiet, unshakable strength. The story of our divorce and the corporate takedown became a legend in the tech world, a cautionary tale about underestimating the quiet ones. I became an accidental icon for women in tech, a symbol of taking back one's power. It was a role I accepted with some reluctance, but I understood its importance. I wanted my story to be a message to every woman who had ever been told to step back, to be quiet, to let the men take the credit. I wanted them to know that their work had value, and that they should never, ever let anyone take it from them. Life found a new, steadier rhythm. My children, now teenagers, returned home. The transition was delicate. They had witnessed the public implosion of their father and the meteoric rise of their mother. We had many long, difficult conversations. I was honest with them. I told them that their father had made terrible mistakes, but that my actions were not just about revenge. They were about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, for them and for our future. I never badmouthed him, I simply laid out the facts. To their credit, they understood. They had seen his neglect and his arrogance for years. They were proud of me, and their support was the validation that mattered more than any stock price or glowing press article. Our new home was smaller, warmer, and filled with more laughter than the old mansion ever had been. My relationship with Mark became non-existent. Our only communication was through our lawyers regarding visitation schedules for the children. I heard through the grapevine that he was trying to start a new consulting business, but his name was toxic in the industry. He was a pariah. His story was a permanent stain he would never wash out. I sometimes wondered if he felt any remorse, if he ever truly understood the depth of his betrayal. I concluded that it didn't matter. His internal life was no longer my concern. My focus was on the future. Phoenix Systems continued to thrive, but I made sure my life was not consumed by it. I had learned my lesson. I would not sacrifice my family or my well-being on the altar of ambition again. I delegated, I took vacations, I was present for my children. I had fought to reclaim my life's work, and I was determined to enjoy the life it afforded me. I found a balance that Mark, in his insatiable hunger for more, had never been able to achieve. One evening, I was working late in my office, reviewing the designs for our next major software update. The city lights glittered outside my window. My office was quiet, the only sound the soft click of my keyboard. I thought back to that moment years ago when Mark had called me a housewife, his voice dripping with condescension. He had meant it as an insult, a way to diminish me. But he had been wrong. I was a housewife, and a mother, and an engineer, and a CEO. I was all of those things. My strength didn't come from shedding those roles, it came from integrating them. I had managed a home, and now I managed a company. I had raised children, and now I nurtured talent. The skills were the same. The scale was just different. He had tried to put me in a box, but I had proven that my box was a universe he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The greatest victory was not in his ruin, but in my own quiet, confident success. I had not just taken back my company, I had taken back my life, on my own terms. The passage of time brought with it a sense of peace that I had once thought unattainable. Phoenix Systems solidified its position as the undisputed industry leader. We innovated, we grew, and we did so with a corporate culture that became a model for the tech world. We offered generous parental leave, championed diversity, and invested in our employees' well-being. We proved that it was possible to be both highly profitable and deeply humane. My children grew into remarkable young adults. My daughter went to college to study computer science, her passion for coding a source of immense pride for me. My son pursued art, his creativity a joyful counterpoint to our family's technical inclinations. They were happy and well-adjusted, their lives a testament to the fact that our family had not been destroyed, but reforged in the fire. I never remarried. My life was full, and I was content in my own company. I had built a world for myself that was so rich and satisfying. The thought of introducing the complexities of a new partnership felt unnecessary. My work, my children, and my close circle of friends were my everything. The story of Alina Rostova and Mark Vance became less of a current event and more of a cautionary tale taught in business schools. Mark faded into obscurity. Last I heard, he was living in a different state, working a mid-level management job, a man haunted by the ghosts of an empire he had stolen and then lost. I harbored no ill will towards him. He was simply irrelevant, a closed chapter in a book I had long since finished reading. One day, a young journalist from a major tech publication requested an interview. I rarely granted them, but her letter was thoughtful, focusing not on the drama of the divorce, but on the lessons of my career. I agreed. We sat in my office, the city sprawling beneath us. She asked me the question that I had been asked many times in many different ways. Looking back, she said, do you have any regrets? Would you have done anything differently? I thought for a moment, not about Mark or the revenge, but about the long, quiet years before the storm. The years when I had allowed my own light to dim so that his could shine brighter. My only regret, I said, my voice clear and steady, is that I waited so long to reclaim my own name. I spent 2 decades as a silent partner in my own life. I would advise every woman and every person who feels invisible in their own story to not wait for a betrayal to force them to act. Step into the light. Demand the credit. Your work, your ideas, your contributions have value. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. The journalist was furiously scribbling notes. I looked out the window, a faint smile on my lips. The revenge had been a necessary act of war, a battle I had to fight to survive. But the victory, the real, lasting victory, was in the peace that followed. It was in the quiet confidence of knowing my own worth, a knowledge that no one could ever take from me again. I had built an empire, lost it, and then built a better one. The phoenix had not just risen, it had learned to soar. Years later, my daughter, now a brilliant engineer in her own right at Phoenix Systems, came into my office. She was leading a new project, a revolutionary piece of software that would once again change the industry. She was excited, her eyes shining with the same fire I once had. "Mom," she said, spreading a series of schematics across my desk. "I think I've found a way to make the core architecture 10 times more efficient, but it means we have to tear down the old foundation completely." I looked at the plans, a complex and beautiful web of logic. She was right. It was audacious, risky, and utterly brilliant. She was proposing to destroy a piece of my original, foundational work to build something far superior. I felt a surge of pride so immense it almost took my breath away. "Then tear it down," I said with a smile. "That's what we do. We build, we innovate, and we're never afraid to start over from the ashes, especially when we know we can build something better." She smiled back, a look of shared understanding passing between us. The legacy was not in the code I had written 25 years ago. The legacy was in her, in the culture of fearless innovation we had built, in the knowledge that the past was a foundation to be built upon, or, when necessary, to be demolished to make way for the future. As she left, I leaned back in my chair, the setting sun casting long shadows across my office. Mark had tried to erase my name from our creation, but my name, my true legacy, was now etched into the future, carried forward by a new generation. The ultimate justice was not in the destruction of my enemy, but in the enduring, thriving creation of a better world in his place. The best revenge, I had learned, is not a life destroyed, but a life brilliantly lived. My story became a quiet legend, not because of the drama, but because of what came after. Phoenix Systems became more than a company. It was a testament to a different way of doing business. We championed ethical AI, invested heavily in data privacy for our users, and started a foundation to fund STEM education for underprivileged girls. I had taken the power that I had seized and used it to create positive change, turning the bitter ashes of my past into fertile ground for a better future. I learned that true power isn't about control or dominance. It's about the ability to create, to nurture, and to empower others. Mark's style of leadership, based on ego and fear, was a fragile, hollow thing. It had shattered at the first real challenge. My leadership, built on a foundation of respect, collaboration, and a deep, unshakable belief in my own work, had proven to be resilient and enduring. The greatest lesson was that my identity was not something that could be given to me or taken away by a man. It was something I had to forge myself. I was not just Mark's wife, or a mother, or a housewife. I was Alina Rostova, an architect of digital worlds, a leader, a survivor. Each of these facets was a part of me, and together they made me whole. My journey had been one of reclamation. I had reclaimed my name, my work, my fortune, and my life. The final act of reclamation was my own narrative. I was no longer the victim in a story of betrayal. I was the protagonist in a story of empowerment. The woman who had been erased had rewritten her own history, and in doing so, had created a future far grander than anything she had lost. The fire of betrayal had been meant to destroy me, but it had only served to reveal the indestructible core within. It had burned away the non-essential, leaving only the fierce, brilliant, and unbreakable truth of who I was. As I prepared to hand over the reins of Phoenix Systems to the next generation, with my daughter as a leading candidate for the CEO position, I took a moment to reflect on the long arc of my journey. The pain of Mark's betrayal had long since faded, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected path it had set me on. Without that crucible, I might have lived out my life in a gilded cage, my full potential unrealized, a silent partner in a story where I deserved to be the lead. The universe, in its own brutal way, had handed me an opportunity to become the person I was always meant to be. The ultimate lesson was this: sometimes, the things that break us are the very things that set us free. The collapse of my old life was not an ending. It was a violent, necessary demolition that cleared the way for a new, more authentic structure to be built in its place. I had lost a husband and a marriage, but I had gained myself. And in the end, it was the most valuable asset I would ever possess. My name is Alina Rostova, and I am the architect of my own life. It is a structure built on a foundation of resilience, integrity, and the unwavering belief that from any ashes, something beautiful and strong can rise. And that is a truth no one can ever take away. The final chapter of my professional life was to ensure the one I was leaving behind. I established a trust that made every employee of Phoenix Systems a shareholder, transforming the company from a private enterprise into a collective endeavor. It was my final rebuttal to Mark's possessive, egocentric view of creation. A company, I believed, was not the creation of one person, but the sum total of the passion and hard work of everyone involved. This move cemented my legacy in the industry as a true visionary, one who defined success not by personal wealth, but by shared prosperity. The circle was complete. The company that had started with a secret partnership between a husband and wife, a partnership that had been betrayed and broken, was now a public partnership among thousands of dedicated individuals. It was the ultimate expression of the collaborative spirit that I had always believed in. My personal life was one of quiet contentment. I watched my children build their own lives, proud of the kind, intelligent, and ethical adults they had become. I found joy in simple things: the logic of a well-written line of code, the beauty of a sunset over the ocean, the warmth of a conversation with my daughter about the future of technology. I had faced the worst of betrayals and emerged not bitter, but whole. My story was a testament to the fact that revenge can be a catalyst, but it is not a destination. The true goal is to build a life so full of purpose and joy that the past no longer has the power to cast a shadow. I had done that. I had taken the rubble of my former life and used it to build an unshakable fortress of peace, success, and self-worth. My final act as CEO was to write a letter, not to the public or the press, but to the new employees of Phoenix Systems, to be included in their orientation packet. In it, I told a simplified version of my story. I didn't mention Mark by name, referring to him only as a co-founder who lost his way. I wrote about the importance of integrity, of valuing every contribution, and of never allowing ego to cloud one's judgment. I ended the letter with a simple piece of advice. Your name is the most valuable thing you will ever build. Your work is its signature. Sign it with pride, with honesty, and with the unwavering belief in your own worth. Build things that last. Build things that matter. And never, ever let anyone else take the credit for what you have created. It was the lesson I had learned in the most painful way possible, and it was the most important piece of wisdom I could pass on. As I walked out of the Phoenix Systems headquarters for the last time as CEO, leaving it in the capable hands of my daughter and her team, I felt no sadness, only a profound sense of accomplishment. The journey had been long and arduous, but I had reached my destination. I was free, I was whole, and I was the undisputed author of my own story. The housewife had not only reclaimed the empire, she had redefined what it meant to rule it.